Hey there, welcome to episode 3 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I'm recording this on the 28th of November, 2023. It's a nice, chilly Tuesday morning here in sunny Las Vegas. As a quick reminder, Quaggling Sand is the term I coined in probably 1973 or so. You may refer to pins and needles or general numbness in your limbs due to a return of lost circulation. If you've sat on your foot, if you've laid on your hand, and so on. Quaggling sand. It's generally supposed to evoke a certain sort of mental image, I suppose. So the Quaggling Sand Show, a story-laden audio program, usually with a point of some kind. Today we're going to talk about any computer, anywhere, anytime, how I got into all this, but I think more importantly, why you should too. I was first exposed to Pong in around 1976. My dad's father, my grandfather, brought a Pong game home to my grandparents' house, and I was fascinated. I think as most of the world was. So I think it was 1976, give or take, somewhere in there. And we played with it, and I was hooked. I was going to be using computers forever. So the thing that took me was the interaction, I do something over here, you do something happens over there, and so on. So yeah, fascinated at age 5. Several years later, my uncle got an Interact computer. It was a very strange pre-VIC-20, pre-Atari 400, just a very early, television-based computer, cassette loading, silly software. I was fascinated by the Star Trek game. So you could launch torpedoes and find Klingons. It was grid movement. It was sort of like Battleship, really. But couldn't get enough of it. Later, he would get a Intellivision game system. And I think I was around age 10. And then we ended up getting an Atari 2600. Arguably, Intellivision was cool and all. But the Atari 2600 has a certain place in computer history. We can't deny that. I became a huge fan of Pitfall, Kaboom. Actually, Activision games, I think, were my favorites. It goes without saying, Adventure, The White Dot. Can't go wrong. So the Atari 2600 was our first computer in the home, probably around 1981 or so. And that was essentially around that time, nonstop aha moments. Couldn't get enough. So I used to go to the library quite a bit. The Velma Teague Library in downtown Glendale, Arizona. They happen to have a pretty substantial magazine section. They had Computer Shopper, they had Byte Magazine, those are my two favorites. So I used to just pore over Computer Shopper. And if anybody remembers the big oversized version, it was basically like newsprint. It was like a want ads in bound form, like a free paper bound, like a thick, heavy, oversized magazine. And of course, Byte Magazine, Circuit Seller, Jerry Pournelle, is that? Anyway, all these characters. I'm sure I came upon John C. Dvorak at some point in there. So yeah, all these old school nerds. And continuing the addiction. It's burning up my library card. Any book, any magazine, any computer show on PBS, any computer I would see in a mall, in a store that was printing nonstop, 10 print, hello, 20, go to 10, adding the comma. Anyway, good old days. But any opportunity to touch or to be proximal to a computer or anything about computers or anyone dealing with or working with or teaching computers, I was in. It was difficult to get computer access, though, until I was in the 6th grade. One of my probably the best, most attentive teacher, the teacher that was more pro-education for the people causing trouble like myself, the bored kids. She said, hey, and she wasn't being condescending. She was literally the most supportive teacher of all of my pre-junior high school, like K through 6. I'm sorry, K through 6, kindergarten through 6th grade. Kindergarten and 1st grade were in New Jersey. That's another story about not being allowed to read, but we'll get there. So Miss Reeker, Deborah Reeker, said, hey, we just got in some computers. They're in the library. Miss Jaswinski, if I remember correctly, our librarian. I think it was Kitty Jaswinski. I used to go to the library at my school a lot and check out books and whatnot, back when you would sign your name on a card and they would chop off the edge of the card for the latest due date to timestamp. Oh, the good old days. And so they had these computers in a little side room. Myself and two other students who I think were probably in maybe a year or two ahead of me, 7th or 8th grade. We were just in there whenever we wanted to be. I had my floppy disk. I think it was a BASF floppy in a red jacket. My how many floppies would I have later in life? But it was like my prized possession, my one floppy disk to store stuff, my learnings. So I learned BASIC on an Atari 800. I think there were 2 or 3 Atari 800s and one Atari 400. And if anybody ever used an Atari 400, we know the worst keyboard ever. I mean, if you're going for like a Sinclair ZX1, I think it was, the touch keyboard there probably a little bit more functional, but the membrane weirdness of the Atari 400, awful, just awful, horrible. So I learned BASIC, learned the basics of BASIC, I suppose. Atari 800, not a great computer, but certainly an early sort of game changer, really, for me, certainly. I became a student aide or library aide in the library at Royal Palm Junior High School. I changed entire school districts to try to get more education. That should be a whole topic right there. Education is fundamental. So in 7th grade, Patricia Bunnell, the librarian, and Deborah Sparks, the librarian assistant, basically let me have free reign. So I would shelve the books. I would interact with the students when they were checking stuff out. I would go wandering around the campus, finding or delivering things, teachers, administrative office, etc. So I kind of had the run of the place, which was kind of fun. And they had an Apple II Plus in the corner that they would use for random things. So anytime I wanted to do anything, especially after school, I could hang out there. They would leave, and I was in the lock-in. Age 12, the library lock-in. So I would just have complete access. I mean, there was no networking, there was no school records to be accessed and whatnot. So yeah, I had the Apple II Plus and my floppy disk, which was now an Apple formatted floppy disk, not for the Atari, no more Atari. And I used to have complete access to the computer book section. That's the first time I came upon a book called Metamathemagical Themas. Totally fascinating. I actually purchased that book on a Kindle. Yeah. Just to have it, just as a, keepsake. I have no idea if it's still in print, but yeah. So libraries, computers, 2 great tastes, turns out. And as it happens, I did not have this in my notes. I just banged out a whole bunch of stuff here, and the show could go on much longer than it will. And by the way, in the show notes, I have links to many things, including a link to buy me a coffee if you'd like to support this and many other content creation efforts. That's about as much advertising as I'll do. I also have a Ko-fi page, ko-fi.com. I don't really use that as much, but maybe I will. But yeah, buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo, DANHUGO. Very much like it sounds. So yeah, I have links to if you are not familiar with what an Apple II Plus is or an Apple IIe, I have links. So back to the show. I happened in 8th grade to be in the class that was responsible for our school newspaper. And because the teacher was very proactive, very pro-education, and all that, so we did it for real. We had all the students writing articles in the class, and then they needed someone to typeset it. So I sat in the nurse's office where there was an available Wang terminal to access, and I don't even know, I can't remember what it was, but to access the online typesetting system. It was not LaTeX or anything. LaTeX. Nowhere near as capable. But it was an interesting, I should look that up someday, just out of curiosity. So I typeset the computer. I used to type, I don't know why this was the case, maybe just because neuroplasticity at the time. I would type every day, and the articles would be written by the students. They would do it at a certain time. I think we came out with the quarterly editions. So the students would write the articles, and and they would edit them and whatever, and then they would come to me, and I would start typing them in. So I would just be typing and typing and typing and typing. And it got to the point where when I was not typing, if someone would speak or if I was speaking, I would envision typing the words as they were being spoken or as I heard them. So that was sort of interesting. And then the typeset content, you'd set the gutters and the column width and all that stuff. And we would end up with camera-ready printouts, like glossy strips of paper. And we would put glue on the back of them, and we would place them on, marked paper. So you'd have your actual typeset, not quite with metal characters, but the equivalent placed on a master layout, and then those would get run off. And so the typeset camera ready content was at the district office, which happened to be next door to our junior high school. So I literally would go walk across through a little walkway through the fence, not a hole in the fence, an actual walkway with a separate gate and everything. Walk to the district office, go in. Hey, Dan, how's it going? Oh, yes, your content is ready. And I would go pick up, and I would walk back with streams of paper. They would print it on probably, 3-inch wide by however long. So I'd go over there a couple of times and get the printout so they could start doing the layout. So it was a classic, mechanical, very, very digital plus analog school newspaper project. It was fascinating. So computer meets the written word, somehow printed and output to the masses is a definite learning experience. Maybe that would pay off for later at Salon, which is another episode down the road. So another interesting thing that happened right in there, that was in 8th grade. In 7th grade, I had an opportunity to help a student named Cindy, who was vision impaired, not 100% blind, but definitely almost. She was taking a programming class at Grand Canyon Community College, and she said, "Hey, can you help me use terminals and teletypes to program Pascal? I'm learning Pascal." And I said, "Oh, I'll learn Pascal also." So I learned Pascal on a VAX. We were programming with ED, the line editor. We were programming on a teletype, literally typing teletype commands and spitting out output on a green and white striped tractor feed paper. And I was loving it. Learned FizzBuzz and Pascal in general. That would pay off later at Harvey Mudd, where they had not yet switched over to teaching C as part of their CS5 Introduction to Computer Programming class. So I already knew Pascal when I got there. That was convenient. That would be many years later, about 5. So yeah, learned VAX Pascal. Learned about the VAX in general. That was very useful. I have to say, for being a 12-year-old kid at the time, and you'll hear me say this at other times, 7th grade is the time if you're going to start looking at what you want to do or what you love doing or what you're really interested in or some combination of those things. My personal experience, and then later observing and interacting with this age range. Something about 12 years, or maybe it's the 7th grade, maybe it's the way American education works, maybe it was at the time I had access to things, maybe the timing was right. I will still posit the 7th grade sort of inflection point, even today, 12-year-olds, that's where you want to really start focusing on how to turn ideas and interests into future innovation, like entrepreneurialism, contributing to the world, etc. Anyway, I digress. So right in 7th grade as well, coincidentally perhaps, I started becoming more social in the nerd world. I was a fairly active member of, at the time, I think right before 7th, probably 6th grade, maybe 7th, I can't remember. I was a member of the, possibly the youngest who would show up by myself, the Arizona Desert Apple Menagerie, and that would later be renamed the Arizona Apple Users Group. And it was a real user group. It had a real president and had a real engagements with Apple and so on. I would hang out with people that were similarly interested in computers and especially Apple products. Little did we know. I met the president of a company in Tempe, Arizona called Checkmate Technologies. They made memory expansion cards for the computer I would have. So around this time, it was when I went to high school, but I was a member of the users group. So eventually, when I got my Apple IIe, as I matriculated to high school, the Apple IIe had a special expansion slot. You could put a video card this one had a megabyte of RAM, and I got orange CRT driver so it wasn't green phosphors. It turned them orange, amber. So yeah, that was interesting. So that was my first run in with like, oh, if I know the right people with similar interests. So I got a discount, and I go, hey, can I get the phosphor color change? And he's like, yeah, just come to the office and I'll switch it out for you for free. So, oh, cool. During our meetups, we would probably monthly. I got a first look at the classic Apple IIgs powered by the Western Design Center 65816, which still fascinates me to this day. You can still read about it. If you are a computer museum type character, and there are many, if you're into the old school, if you're an 8-bit hacker, classic computing and whatnot, then the 816 you probably have one. I pondered, I mean, if I would have been able to get a 2GS, I probably would have, although I'm probably glad that I didn't. But I would, the 6502 is making a comeback lately. The 65C02 that was in the 2C, the Apple IIc, and of course, so the 6502 was MOS, metal oxide semiconductor. The 65C02 was CMOS, complementary MOS. And then, the 65.8, was it 08 and 65.816, I think? 16 had multiplex buses. It was totally fascinating to me. Totally, lots of reading. And then, of course, we had our first look at the Mac, the classic Macintosh 68000. Somebody from Motorola came by and gave us these sort of heavy stock cards with failed 68000 chips on them. So it was a real 68000 chip that just failed QC. So binned for the garbage. Oh, wait, marketing. So I got a bunch of those, and I made my sister some earrings, little chips on them. Basically glued them to the some normal little basic earrings. They lasted for a while. Not as long as the 68000 did. But yeah, so that was interesting to be a part of a group that had this common interest. To meet in person, also highly valuable. If ever I were to argue against the work from home, remote, distributed workforce model, it would be the social engagement component, but that you can still have that. You just have to be creative. But that was my first exposure to that. Sharing ideas, learning about new things, etc. So great. I was hanging with nerds, 7th grade through high school. Once I went off to high school, I stopped having as much time. But through 7th and 8th grade, especially, I'm learning about the VAX. I was hanging out with these dudes, unfortunately, all dudes, of course, and we would go have pizza, and we would do computer nerdy stuff. The Hangout seemed to be a computer, like a junk store. I say that with much respect, but a kind of a computer junk store slash, repair, probably the early days of e-waste recovery. They had a BBS, a bulletin board system that they ran on an old HP mainframe. I couldn't tell you how old it was or the model. Who knows? I was blissfully ignorant to these finer points at the time. But there were aside from the fact that I was hanging out with yet more nerds, there were three fun things. One, they had a Van de Graaff generator. So a spark would arc, or a bolt of lightning really, would arc across two posts with spheres on the tops. It was pretty cool. And that's neither here nor there. They had the mainframe with Digitalker. So every time somebody would dial in, this is back in dial-up days, there was no internet yet, sorry. Oh, technically, the ARPANET was around, but yeah, no internet for us. So every time somebody would dial in, it would be announced. Some account name, blah, blah, has logged in. This is Digitalker. So that was kind of interesting to hear once in a while. If you've ever seen, I can't remember the name of the movie now, the movie about the credit card online stuff. They had the bell ring every time they made a credit card purchase. And so that kind of it's kind of fun to hear that kind of feedback that your service is being used. So the name will come to me. Something Men. I can't remember. Anyway, I'll add to the show notes if I can figure it out. But Good times. They had the piece de resistance. It was on the cover of Byte. It was the big thing. HP 150 touchscreen. The touchscreen itself just had a ring, or I guess on the bezel for this CRT screen. It had little LEDs and light detectors, so you would break a beam of light with your finger. You could have one finger dragging around a cursor, or maybe you could use a stylus or something. So you're just it was basically like hitting arrow keys, but it would figure out where on the screen you were. I guess it was technically an absolute positioning device, but it was absolutely fascinating to me. So got to play with one of those. So I guess this little shop had an HP affiliation, so that was cool. And the dudes that I was hanging out with were into basically low-grade software piracy. So I learned about Locksmith, and they were all Apple fans too. So I learned about Locksmith and the Apple II disk, not only DOS but ProDOS. Had my Beneath Apple DOS, Beneath Apple ProDOS books. Learned all about the IWM, and if you know, you know. So I'm only going to say that, the IWM. And I was able to fix disks, so I wasn't really about pirating software so much as fixing disks. I lost some data, or I can't read my disk is clicking and not doing it. Okay, let me see it, and I would fix it up. Almost every time, what did I know, right? But it was fun. I use that word very explicitly. It was fun to learn how things worked and to be able to actually fix them or hack on them or make them do what I wanted. These were my first engagements with people kind of out and about. It would be a mixture of super intensely nerdy people, as I've described, and then normal people who were becoming familiar with computers, so the early adopters. And then, of course, you'd interact with people who just had no idea. They had to deal with computers, but they didn't really know. Parents, librarians, etc. So these were important times. And like I said, 7th grade, 8th grade, freshman year of high school, these were absolutely seminal interactions at a seminal time. So I was working at McDonald's, saving up for my first modem. This was critical. This was the beginning of the beginning, really. Or maybe it's the end of the beginning. But it was a crucial step in my personal timeline. Hayes, the owner of the AT standard for modems, the way you send commands to modems, still in use recently, possibly even today. If you have a cell phone, you probably have a Hayes AT command set compatible modem in your pocket. AT-DT for the win. So I was able, once the 2400 came out, by the way, do you know what baud means versus bitrate? We're talking symbols, we're talking quadrature. Good times. 2400 is the fastest you can send symbols on normal phone lines in America. How'd you get 9600, 19.2, 53K? It's all about quadrature. So I got my Mitsuba 1200. So prices came down when 2400 became the thing. So 1200 baud modem. I love that thing. I used to dial into the Arizona Apple Users Group BBS. I used to dial into anything that had a modem in it. Then I learned about Sprint codes. I used to, technically, I'll tell you how I did it. I wrote a program to dial a known telnet access number in the Phoenix area. But I would dial through a Sprint phone number, and I would just have it enter phone number or Sprint codes. So ADDT, Sprint, comma, number, comma, and then the telnet access point. So, and then I had a printer, tractor, of course, dot matrix. I had a printer, so I would let it run for hours, overnight usually. And I would wake up in the morning and I'd have 3 or 4 Sprint codes that it found. So total brute force, but why not? I then, I wrote a war dialer, of course, War Games, Matthew Broderick and friends. War dialer to dial all the last 4 digits from 0 to 9,999 in a phone system prefix. I would later modify that to put one phone number on digital pagers, 1,000 at a time. That's good times. You could call it a distributed denial of service attack by humans. Because guess what? When back in the digital pager days, if you got a random number that you had never seen before on your pager, you're going to call it. And it was busy, so you'd call it again. So automatically kept the target phone number basically out of commission. Denial of service, that's how that works. Out of commission for days. Good times. And I had called, this is before caller ID. So I called the pager, I think it was PageNet or something. I said, hey, I keep getting these numbers on my pager. Do you ever track them down? They're like, nope. So yeah, that's how that went. I worked at McDonald's, as I mentioned, saved up some money, got my modem, whatever other nerdy stuff. Someone I met at the Arizona Apple Users Group, Robert Smith, frontman for The Cure. No, not really. That was his name, though. He had his own company doing sort of independent on-site electronica. So alarm systems, fire alarms, burglar alarms, sensing in general, motion sensing. And those things were, by the way, were super interesting. I learned how, what does a Class A fire alarm system do? How does it work? All that stuff. But one of the things that we also did with we put in burglar alarms was plain old telephone service, POTS, knowing, I already kind of knew how phones worked, but your blue and white, green and white, orange and white, you leave lots of, and by the way, my mom's uncle was a lineman for the phone company. So my dad's mom was a operator for AT&T. There were probably some other, so we had some telephony in our heritage. So I learned on the ground, very practical phone hackery. I made my own freak phone, so I was able to dial from the phone boxes and all that stuff. It just, pretty basic stuff. A losing or fading anachronism today. There are still punch blocks. There are still twisted pair phone lines. Legacy phone systems will probably be around for a little bit longer. So that was fun to learn. But this was just another component of the overall system that I was learning about, which is, how things worked, how they fit together, how they interacted. Then I went off to college, Harvey Mudd College, in fact, Southern California. I did not have a computer when I got there. We left the 2E behind because I figured there were plenty of shared computing resources, which there were. My friend freshman year and then my eventual roommate, Kevin, got a Macintosh 2CX, which was kind of amazing at the time. So I'd use his computer. My other friend / roommate, friend freshman year, roommate sophomore, Tuck, his dad worked for IBM, so he had an IBM PS2. So we used to, they were kind enough to let me use their computers now and then. We had compute labs. We had the VAX, coincidentally. Hey, I've already used this. I already know how this works. So HMC VAX was a VMS running monster. There were two different departments. This was computing services, I think. So you could use the VAX. Everybody got a student account. I was Hugo at HMC VAX, etc. I think my favorite thing about VMS, if I have to be honest, because there are a few things to like about it, but VMS, and by the way, I have links. Let me interrupt myself briefly to say that I have a link, a lot of Wikipedia links, because they're trying to make some money, trying to stay in business. So go Wikipedia. I've actually donated money to Wikipedia. I have a link to the VAX. I have a link to OpenVMS, which was back then just VMS. That's the virtual memory system, but it's basically the equivalent of Windows or Unix, but maybe Linux if you like. VMS had a cool feature. You could nowadays, if you save a file. Oh no, I didn't mean to save that. So they had it would automatically append, I think it was semicolon revision number. So if you had like my critical document and you saved it, it would be semicolon 1. And then if you select all, delete, like hit the backspace key, and then accidentally save that, you're like, no, I lost that. Nope, that's just critical document 2. So then you just would roll back to version 1. I just thought that was cool. Nowadays, you can just commit stuff to Git or Subversion or your revision control system of choice, but that's a conscious step. Or you can, I'm sure there are similar features, but this was just available. You would just automatically have files saving like this unless you turned it off, I suppose. So, and then the purge command, you could purge all the previous revs and everything. So yeah, totally convenient. That was one of my, I guess, I don't know if you have a favorite feature of your legacy old school operating system, but so HMC VAX, and then I ended up working for the computer science department. So it was computing services and computer science, both CS. So I got a consulting job for the computer science department. And of course, they were too cool for VMS. So they had, at the time, very cool stuff. The early days of this kind of thing, a sequent balance. And then during my time, upgraded to a sequent symmetry Dynix machine. So I have links to those also in the show notes in the links. So Dynix, Dynamic Unix, could run on multiple Intel 8386 microprocessors. And the symmetry, the balance, no, symmetry. Symmetry with the 386s had I don't know if the balance had this. The symmetry, if one of the processors failed, because this was a thing back then, it would automatically reroute. It would like know the processor was no longer functioning. It had non-uniform memory architecture, of course, so NUMA, probably not CC NUMA. So if one of the CPUs failed, it would automatically not allocate jobs to that processes to the processor, and would keep on chugging. So you could actually, it was almost like RAID for CPUs, rakes, although probably RAE, C, so, or M, RAME, RACM. 386s were not inexpensive. Anyway, so the consulting on the sequence symmetry, lovingly named J. Arthur, after a professor who had passed away, Harvey Mudd. J. Arthur Campbell, if memory serves. So got an account on J. Arthur, doing my consulting. They had Spark stations. I learned all about X, the X11 Windows system, not called X if you are adhering to their policies. So I learned all about GUI, client, and server. So not everything was the Mac OS. Thank goodness for that. So yeah, that was tremendously educational. And then senior year, took advanced microprocessors. So all through school, computing was used for everything. So there was no question about that. It was a super nerd school, and we were super nerds. Senior year, advanced microprocessors with my friend and suite mate by this time. So single rooms sharing a little corner of a building with a bathroom in the new dorm. So Bill and I so we took advanced microprocessors, which was a IPS, independent program of study. You just come up with a project, implement it. We had learned substantial amounts during the first semester, which was just microprocessors. We made our own orthogonal register, shared bus, orthogonal register, microstore microprocessor of our own. It was 4-bit with a common bus. You could attach registers and ALUs. We had an EEPROM. EEPROMs were not around yet for us. So we had a stack of UV erasable. EEPROMs are electronically. So EPROMs, erasable programmable read-only memory. So we'd program in our microstore of instructions. So the ROM would drive. We wanted to use all the stuff. So we had PALs that would decode chip selects and bus and all this. And so the ROM would issue the micro instruction through the PAL decoders, program array logic. So the PALs we could have the microstore, and we would decouple the micro instructions from the actual implementation, and then we could actually add more parts. We could move them around. So it was pretty interesting. We spread it across multiple breadboards with blue wires only, just to make it challenging, protecting our IP. So then we went on to advanced micro-Ps, and we built, using a microcontroller, what we call the robot. It's an inverted pendulum problem robot. So we took the approach of building a platform on a cylinder with a single drive wheel that was controlled by a microcontroller, a 68 HC11. During microprocessors, we had access to HC11s, HC16s, Motorola 56001 of the 56000 family of DSPs. So we learned all about those. Like I said, we had access to and made use of PALs and EPROMs and all sorts of things. And then for the motor control, so that was our micro-Ps. For advanced micro-Ps, now we did not have direct access to, we had HC11 EVBs, evaluation boards. Those are not really usable in an embedded project. Arduino had not come onto the scene yet. This was 1992. So you really couldn't take something like an Arduino Uno, or now they're even smaller boards. Nobody was making RP 2040s or things like this. So an EVB for an HC11 was, silly, huge. So we needed some HC11s. So you can pick up an Arduino Uno from Arduino. The Arduino R4 I think is like $25. You can get the Wi-Fi, the full version for 20 and 30 or something like that. I have one somewhere. So the Uno R4. So back then, if you wanted to get an HC11 from Motorola or anywhere, probably from Hallmark or something, I worked for the engineering stockroom during the summer before this, so I was familiar with how the school procured things. And, Matt, rest in peace, Matt Masterson, was still working in the stockroom. Like, Matt, how can we get one 68 HC11? He's like, we don't have any. If they had one, they would have let us have it, but they didn't have any. So we had to scrounge. So we found one project. I think Matt probably put us together. Found a project where they were using HC11s, and they had a rail. If you know what a rail is, you purchase like a dozen or 100 in rails. You could buy them in some parts you get in spools, especially if they're surface mount parts. So these were PLCC 68 HC11s. We were able to get 2 of them, and I think we ended up somehow getting a DIP part also, dual inline package, the classic. So we were able to put that in our wire wrapped computer, and I think the PLCCs we were able to get some adapter at some point. But we scrounged around. We were able to get a spare access to spare hardware. Luckily they had a compiler for the HC11 that we were able to also borrow, and we built our manually wire wrapped 68 HC11 embedded microcomputer. And then Bill went to town and did the motor controller. We had Bill also with substantial help from Ed Stubblefield, the super duper machinist in his machine shop. He used to work at TRW on turbine blades, so he had all of his fingers and loads of skill. So he helped us make a actual physical aluminum billet gyroscope, real spinning aluminum with a optical encoder to measure offsets. It was doomed to fail, even though it didn't. But so a spinning piece of aluminum with an optical encoder, which we did not properly damp. So once it started oscillating, it would be all over the place. But the fun part was, once we assembled this ridiculously overweight, we did not want it to be tethered. So we got unbelievably heavy lead acid batteries. We built an aluminum platform. Thank you, E54, for learning us how to do sheet metal fabrication. So brakes and cuts and brakes and stamps. So we had a all sheet metal chassis, a hole in the middle for the drive wheel, a gearbox that Bill also, like with the motor control and the gearbox, he went nuts. And in order to get sufficient torque, the motor could not drive the wheel sufficiently quickly. The batteries were super heavy, and the gyro would start oscillating if we had too much of an offset with a recovery. So and this happens in your inner ear sometimes, if you snap back to vertical, the gyro would overshoot, and then it would start wobbling, and then the whole robot would start. So it would sort of, the poles were on the right side of the plane, if you remember your root locus. So our robot was temporarily or occasionally stable enough to actually work, and it did impress everyone in our class because we built a thing. Nowadays, it would just be a maker. In fact, nowadays, when I was working at Intel, there was a little balancing robot in the corner of one of the labs. I said, "Oh, what's that?" "Oh, that was a Galileo project. It's a 2-wheel balancing robot." It was several feet tall. So nowadays, you can use 6DoF or 9DoF micro machine, like Bosch makes these little 6 or 9, maybe you can get 3, but probably 6 degree of freedom, 6DoF, or 9 degree of freedom, 9DoF, with XYZ, rotation, acceleration, all that stuff. So you do away with the mechanical gyroscope, and you end up with tilt sensing and more for pennies. No machining necessary. You can get your microcontroller. You can get at this point, you could use a Raspberry Pi probably, but you're better off using a real-time, like a real microcontroller. So get yourself a little can get yourself an Arduino, although the Galileo was not a real time. It was an x86 SoC, system on chip. It was running Linux, and then it was running an Arduino compatibility layer. So you're through the switching fabrics and task scheduling and whatnot, you're not really getting real-time performance, not a true microcontroller by any means. But really, if you're going to do balancing, if you have a 6 or 9 DOF sensor, why not go microcontroller? You would have that as a subsystem. You could connect that to a Raspberry Pi, but you'd have the balancing system running on its own. Or maybe not. Up to you. But so fascinating to see how often the inverted pendulum problem and direct real-time sensor, motor control, things like this. Completely and totally educational. It was a self-driven project. Bill, my friend, roommate, lab partner, confidant, good times. Definitely a high point in my educational career. And it would lead into most of the things that I've ever done. It was a weird time when I graduated in 1993. It was economically, the economy was not cooperating. So I had a summer job also for Matt Masterson from the storeroom. Now he was working in the AV department. So I got to copy graduation videos. So he would pay me for recording time. So he would say, hey, Dan, you put your tape in? Yeah, I'm doing a bad Scottish accent, so no disrespect, Matthew. You hit record and you go and do your things and you get paid for, so we're talking like a 4-hour recording or something. So I would just spend, I think he had one input to 4 output decks. So it took me a couple weeks, 4 at a time, 8 per day or something like that. And our graduating class was, I believe, 113, 118, something like that. And yeah, so that was my summer. And then the school said, hey, if you need to use the fax machine, remember those? Fax. Or the job center resources, anything we can do to help our students find jobs. And eventually I would get a job at Supermac, which is a whole nother, that's an entire episode on its own. The first job in Silicon Valley. I did get a job at Supermac Technologies. My job was eventually, after the first couple weeks, they said, hey, we need somebody to do benchmarking of our video cards, which are now, there's a more formal distinction, graphic cards versus video cards. Video cards for capture and display of like video camera to TV or streams or whatever. Graphic cards are about drawing pixels on a screen for gaming, like shaders and voxels, texels, whatever. But anyway, so video cards at the time. So I was benchmarking them against the competitors. So Supermac versus Radius and versus, whatever. So I learned about color space conversion and blitters, dealing with the new bus, which was Apple's interface from Texas Instruments. Learned all about its limitations. That would come in handy later at True Vision, which is probably a whole nother episode. I would get laid off very soon. I had a 2-week gig at Storm Technologies, which was also interesting. I was stuck in the quality assurance trap, but as I will tell you later, everyone should be in QA at some point if they are doing anything with technology at all. Even if you're not doing anything. I mean, if you are tech adjacent, if you work with something that is tech, you should always take part in some way. And at Storm Technologies, every Friday was employee bug hunt day. So they would give prizes for people. So everybody in the company would use the product. So you all become a part of the QA process. So QA, quality assurance, it's how you make sure you are giving something to your customers that you would use, because you did. It's sometimes called eating our own dog food. It should be a part of your corporate culture. Even if you are a company of one, use your stuff. I worked at many computer-related companies, had many roles, different sizes of company, different sizes of teams, different scopes of projects, different focus areas, back-end, front-end, web. I only worked at one.com, salon.com. Strangely enough, publication of the Salon electronic magazine, slightly hearkening back to the typesetting of the newspaper days in 8th grade. Fun times. So there you go. That's an introduction to my scratching the surface of my computing history. The take home, though, I'm concerned what I've described to you. And again, there are some things that are just sort of minor or tangential. But I was so eager to learn how computers worked, I did, from the wire up, right? So wire wrapping a computer with Bill, you are wiring power and data and address and I/O from from CPU to device, or from getting sensor data. If you've ever done assembly language, or if you've ever, with our microprocessor project first semester, if you've ever made a microprocessor with the instruction set, if you've ever built that yourself, then you know how interesting that can be. Eventually, I can tell you about my time doing pre-silicon validation at Intel in Chandler, Arizona, watching program instruction execution on an ARM processor in a Synopsys, I think it was, system emulator. So you could literally watch how the probably VRML, Vermal, right? Is that what it is? Vermal? No. What's the chip modeling? I can't remember. That's not right. Vermal is VR markup language. It's I can't remember that. It starts with a V. Anyway, so they had this virtual model for emulation during pre-silicon. It's pre-silicon, right? There's no chips. So you're emulating everything. You're simulating all the stuff. So all that stuff is fascinating. So when you learn at that level how computers work, how systems work, how system protocols work, how the wire protocols work, I think the value later is difficult to measure. No longer are you shrugging your shoulders saying, I don't know. You're like, oh, this reminds me of something I learned 20 years ago, which has happened recently. So the more you know about how things work, I think the easier time you will have, the easier it is for you to be innovative, the easier it is for you to solve problems or to, just understanding how things work. Could be anything. Computers happen to be the topic of today's episode. All of this would culminate in my time at the Intel Maker Innovator Group, which I think has since been renamed again, even though it's basically dead. But the Maker Innovator Group, we worked with people of all ages that, from what I saw in my travels, these people from age 10 to 70, literally, had a similar sort of intellectual curiosity, knowing how things work and building or making the thing that they're trying to make. It all comes together, and I think that was completely valuable. Not only the time leading up to it, but the time at Intel, even though I had to work for Intel to do it. That's a whole nother episode itself as well. So there you go. Don't forget, buy me a coffee. Why not? If you don't ask, you don't get, right? So your support is appreciated on my Buy Me a Coffee profile, which is linked in the show notes. There's links to my other shows that I'm working on, episodes. I produce a total of 4 different podcasts each week. Let's Innovate for Vegas, for our nonprofit public charity. Cafe Genius Impresarios, about our local Vegas, Greater Vegas entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem. So it's kind of an economic and entrepreneurialism bent. This show, Quaggling Sand, which is stories and tales and educational, whatever. And then FFS Talk, which is what works, what doesn't, what can we do about it? That's more of a focused complain with flashlight. If we're going to curse the darkness, bring a flashlight or light a candle, if you will. So yeah, why not? So those are linked from my Buy Me a Coffee profile. Wander over there if you like. If you want to throw some money into the coffee bin, great. No, I'm not here to become rich because of my meandering stories. But, like I said, don't ask, don't get. I really need to launch the Quaggling Sand website at some point again. Self-hosting is the way to go, but we are available on Spotify and other places. Pondering a video or like chat or interactive version of something like this to hear stories from others. More casual. There's no real structure here, even though I did prepare my notes. And I'll just run through the links again. If anything was interesting, I have a lot of it in the show notes. DECVAX, Digital Equipment Corporation, OpenVMS. A lot of these are Wikipedia. The old Apple II Plus, the HP 150 touchscreen, which was cool. The Apple IIe, which was my first actual computer. Sequent, so a link on Wikipedia about the Sequent computer systems, the balance and the symmetry. Dynamic Unix, or Dynix, which was the operating system, Unix-like, on the Sequent hardware. Links to, again, on Wikipedia for the Motorola 68HC11 microcontroller and the DSP 56000 family of DSPs. We had the 56001, which is a fixed point DSP, single task, if I recall. I think it was the 96,000 series was floating point, for what it's worth. And then a quick link to Supermac, if you've never heard of it. If you were back in the Mac days, if you were a graphic artist, if you were doing Quark or PageMaker or a lot of Photoshop, you probably knew about Supermac and Radius. Yay. Had to start somewhere. That was my foray into the Silicon Valley adventure. My many years learning many things, meeting many people, and exiting with a little help from a fire to bigger and better things. But definitely, absolutely educational, and glad I did it in Silicon Valley. But a lifetime of computer-oriented and tech-oriented education, which is why I'll tell you, not everything is tech. It's always nice to include people and the non-tech parts of trying to accomplish things. If everything were left to tech people, you don't even want to know. And that is where I will leave it. Thank you so much for listening. Check out the Buy Me a Coffee page for other links. And again, you don't have to. You do what you want. Do what you feel is right. But if you need to find those other podcasts I mentioned, they're there. They are there. And I'll try to update that with I'll keep the links current. Aiming for self-hosting for all of these, using Spotify and other services as secondary, so that you will always be able to find the shows and complete and legible show notes that are not relying on the ridiculous silliness of RSS embedded C data in descriptions. So that's where I'll leave it. Thank you again. Take it easy.